Hello, everybody, and welcome to Heartlight Vedic Astrology. Today, I was going to go through the birth chart for Pope Leo XIV, who's just recently installed in that position. This talk is from a Vedic astrology perspective, also known as Jyotish in Sanskrit. Vedic astrology is ancient Indian astrology that's more than 5,000 years old. So, yeah, it's always interesting to me to use this ancient technology to look at celebrity birth charts, and this is no exception. He has a pretty impressive chart that the kind you don't that you really come across. So we'll get into it though, so you can see for yourself. If you're new to Vedic astrology, Jyotish are my videos. All of my teaching videos on the subject are my concepts playlist. They can be found there. Wherever you see a double asterisk in one of my talks, that means there's a teaching video on that subject if you'd like to learn more. My channel is all about playlists. I'm pretty good about organizing my videos into different topic areas so that they're easy to find. So, like if you want to learn about planets or houses or yogas, all those playlists exist. And I do a lot of analysis of famous birth charts on the channel. So if you want a list of all of the famous birth charts, I have a video titled Birth Chart Archive List 2025, which I recently published. So that's up, and that's a list of all the different famous birth charts, whether they're famous people, places, or moments in time. And then the video you can find them in. Because, like doing this specific video for Pope Leo, a lot of my famous videos are like embedded in my like monthly transit videos and stuff like that. So you can't always tell from the title of videos if there's famous charts in them. Also, if you're interested, I have previously analyzed Pope Francis's birth chart. And I've done that in a couple of videos. The first one is Planetary Transits, January 2024. And then also the video Five Great Beings, Pancha Mahapurush Yogas. So there's information about his chart if you'd like to look at that. Also, I thought it might be helpful for some of you. There's a new channel on the feature. Oh, sorry, new feature on the channel, and it's actually auto dubbing. So auto dubbing is now available on this channel in several languages: French, Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, German, Japanese, Indonesian, and Hindi. So I don't, this is a new feature for YouTube and a new feature for this channel. So I don't know how helpful it is, but it might be helpful. So you can check that out. Also, if you've been following along but maybe missed some of the last teaching videos, the last 3 teaching videos I've posted are Libra constellation or Tula Rashi, mantras for the sun or Surya, and Scorpio constellation or Vrishika Rashi. And then if you're new to all this but you'd like to learn more, there's a list at the bottom of the slide of the videos I would start with, if you want to get a good foundation to learn more or to get more out of videos like this, which is mostly interpretation. Okay, so here is his chart, Pope Leo XIV, and his birth data. He was born September 14th, 1955. There does not seem to be an exact birth time for him, and he was born in Chicago, Illinois, United States. So because we don't have an exact birth time for him, sometimes I look at the moon chart for people, and sometimes I look at the sun chart, but actually for him, sun and moon are in the same constellation. So actually, this is sort of a double chart or double reading of a sun chart and moon chart. Okay. So Pope Leo's birth name was Robert Francis, or is Robert Francis Prevost. The other thing to note, I have this in different colors here, so it kind of stands out a little bit, but he was born in Chicago, Illinois. And when I tried to, put the data into my software, a note came up that apparently in Illinois, birth times are required to be listed in Central Standard Time instead of like Central Daylight Time. Okay, because the central, most of the United States, I believe, follows, daylight savings time. The thing, though, is that hospitals are required to do this, but they may not actually follow it. So even if at some point, a birth time is produced, kind of brought to the surface for him, we'd have to double check to make sure that that's actually Central Standard Time versus Central Daylight Time. And again, that's also important to know for those of you who are doing charts that anybody born in Illinois might kind of have that same sort of issue in terms of, an hour can be a big deal, when you're looking at a chart. So So even if we had the birth time, it may not be the right person. Okay, so the day lord for his chart is probably Mercury, because sunrise was at 6:31 a.m. that day. So if he was born before 6:31, that was still considered Mars Tuesday, because in Vedic astrology, days are kind of started at the time of sunrise. So the day lord would have been Mars up until 6:31, and after that it would have been Mercury. All right, so already that tells us potentially something. Mars is a leadership planet, and Mercury and Mars is more of a leadership, like a commander in chief of the army, but also like the CEO. So somebody who'll like roll up their sleeves and kind of get into the nitty gritty daily details of something. In contrast to, like, say, the sun, which represents like the president or sort of kind of overlording body, which can sometimes be a figurehead. Okay. And then Mercury is all about the logical mind, analytical mind. It's also about education, speech. So potentially, one or both of those energies are at play. The Hora Lord is the hour lord. We don't know because we don't have an exact birth time. Okay. So let me just bring us up to the chart for a second here. So just so you can see it where like Mars and Mercury are. Mars is at the top of the chart here. Okay. So, we have Mars at the top of the chart, and you can see sort of because there's a lot of lines there. But Sun is also there, and Moon is also there. And this is all Moon, Mars, and Sun are all in the constellation of Leo, or Simha, Rashi in Sanskrit. Okay. So Leo is ruled by the Sun. So Sun is what we call in swa position in its own sign. That makes Sun extremely strong. Okay. And the Sun, as I mentioned, is a leadership planet. So you actually have the two leadership planets of Mars and Sun being extremely strong in the house of Leo, or in the constellation of Leo. Okay. So if he is running Sun, we're already um, picking up the Sun energy, because Sun will be activated if he was born into Mars, or if he was born on a Tuesday. Sorry, excuse me. Okay. If he was born on Wednesday, which Wednesday is ruled by Mercury, you can see in the second house. So, I should say that first. So this is a North Indian style chart. That's what I use in my work. So if you've never seen one before, the way you orient yourself is you go to the top diamond in the middle. The top diamond in the middle is the rising sign, also known as the ascendant, first house, and in Sanskrit, the lagna. Okay. That's the first house. To get to the other houses, 2 through 12, you count counterclockwise or up and to the left. So that upside down triangle in the upper left corner has Mercury and Venus in it. That's the second house. Okay. So you can see Mercury's there, which it's also possible. So he's maybe born at the end of Mars or during most of Mercury or during most of Wednesday. Mercury is in its own sign of Virgo. Okay. And the thing about, which is interesting in Vedic astrology, is Mercury is both exalted in Virgo and it's in its swa position. Okay. So Mercury's super, super strong here. Okay. And the thing is that Sun, which is nesting, the super strong Sun is basically the nest for Mars. And the super strong Mercury, these are the two strongest planets in its charts. Okay. And there are a lot of strong planets in this, which we'll get to, but either way, depending, almost not depending on whatever hour of the day of September 14th he was born, we're already picking up the energy of his two strongest planets. Yeah, so that's already interesting. Okay. Then the birth dasha. So the dasha period is the planetary period he was born into. So up until 21:01 p.m., he would have been born into Ketu, which is the south node of the moon. Okay, because moon was in Leo all day. It was in, I think, the first degree and a half, or the beginning of the day. So just barely into Leo. But up until 21:01, it's going to be in the nakshatra of Maga. So nakshatras are lunar mansions. Okay, there are about 27 of them. Every night the moon passes through a different one. They all have different energies. So Maga is symbolized by a throne. Okay, so we've got Mars, a leadership planet, the CEO. We've got Sun in its own sign, the presidents. So we have the commander in chief, we have the president, and we have the moon in Maga on the throne. And the moon represents the mind, okay, the rational, not the rational mind, the emotional mind, the intuitive mind, okay. So you can see there's like stacking up here in this Leo constellation a lot of leadership and head authority position. Okay, so and also again, you can see since we have Moon and Sun, both in Leo. This is almost like a double chart. It could potentially, if he was actually born, with a Leo rising, on its own, at that specific time of day, this might actually be what we would call a Sudarshan Lagna, where we have the moon, the sun, and the rising sign all lined up in the same constellation. And what happens when somebody has a Sudarshan Lagna, it means that they're super focused in doing things in their life because the moon represents the mind and the sun represents the soul. And the rising sign represents the physicality. So it's kind of lining up the body, the mind, and the soul of somebody in a particular direction. Because otherwise, like if the moon's in one constellation, the sun's in another constellation, the rising sign's another, there can be conflict in terms of what do we follow, the body, the mind, or the soul. But when we have potentially a Sudarshan Lagna here, which we might have, at least two of those, are together, maybe possibly three, then there's a lot less kind of drag on somebody to create results in their life. Okay. So, not only is there leadership here, but there's strength. Okay. And we would get strength even if the moon wasn't here, and even if Mars wasn't here, we would still have sun in its own sign. So that in and of itself, when we have what we call the Lugnatia, the ruling planet for the whole chart, which is the ruler of the rising sign here, when it's in its own sign in the first house, then there's strength. Strength of body, strength physically, strength mentally, because the first house represents the physical form, general health, but also general personality, kind of the first pass you would get of somebody as you got to know them or as you knew them or how they're publicly known. Okay, so a lot of leadership and a lot of strength. Okay, also a lot of fire because Mars and Sun are both fire planets. So that's going to be a lot of drive, a lot of energy, a lot of physicality, also a lot of organization, a lot of getting things done, crossing them off the task list. People who tend to be fiery by nature, and when we're talking about Ayurveda, which is traditional Indian medicine, in Indian medicine, we would say that they're highly high pitta people. They tend to be organized, they tend to be leaders, they tend to be administrators, they tend to be teachers because they have all this fire, and fire is a transformative element. It also can have, when it's out of control, can have an edge to it. Okay, so we've got all that going on for him. So let's see. So where do we leave off? So the birth dasha, planetary period. Did I mention this already? I think I did. Um, Let me just talk about it quickly in case I didn't. Lost in my thoughts there. So the birth dasha, the dasha is a planetary period. No, I don't think I talked about this. I think I talked about Mars and Mercury. So the birth dasha is the planetary period he was born into. So the dasha planets are planets that you can think of them as more active or influential during that time of life. So up until 2101, he was born in K2. K2 has, as a south node of the moon, has a lot of unusual, hidden, unexpected, sometimes explosive type of energy. K2 can also signify really intense spirituality, which I think is true for him in his chart. K2 also brings this kind of unusualness to somebody. And he is, unusual in terms of he was the first US born pope. He's only the second pope from either North or South America. out of, I think, 250 or so popes that have been. Also, he spent a majority of his life in Peru, in another country. Well, he's in Italy, right? So, he has a lot of, I believe, K2 energy, besides the fact that in his chart, K2, you don't always take 5 and 9 aspects for K2, but in this chart, he has 5 and 9 aspects for both K2 and Rahu. Rahu also has this kind of hidden, unexpected energy, but uh, Rahu is more of a energy of ambition and drive towards something. K2 is a little bit more of like a renunciation type energy. Okay, so this K2 that he might have been born into, which he likely was born into for most of the day up until 21:01 p.m., he would be a renunciate. That would bring renunciate energy for him, especially because K2 is in the nakshatra of Mrigashirsha. Mrigashirsha is symbolized by a deer's head, and that's the kind of nakshatra of seeking, like a deer kind of wandering through the forest, wandering through the dark, you know, nibbling on plants and kind of finding a new path, that sort of thing. Far away from civilization and organized living and that sort of thing. So, during creating their own path, essentially. So, if not K2, maybe Venus. Okay. I'm guessing maybe K2 more so, not just because it's more likely time-wise, but Venus is, well, actually, they're kind of related because K2 is in a sign of Venus, so maybe I should take that back. But Venus is not pr particularly strong planet for him. Compared to Sun in its own sign and Mercury in its exaltation and swa sign. The reason why Venus is not as strong, I would say, although there is still strength to Venus, there are a few reasons. One, you can see Venus is in the first degree or so, just past the first degree of Virgo there. When a planet is in the first or last degree of any sign, we call that sandhi, and that creates instability there. Just because when you change signs, you're switching from one element to another. So Venus has just come out of Leo, which is a fire sign, and it's entered Virgo, which is an earth sign. So we're switching from fire action to earth or kind of material, kind of worldly things, material things. Okay. The other thing about Venus is that Venus is debilitated in Virgo. Okay, now it is saved to some degree because it's with the owner or ruler of Virgo, Mercury, which is super strong. So the super strong Mercury is supporting Venus, okay, in its debilitation. Okay. But Venus is Sundhi, it's debilitated. The other thing about Venus is it's combust. So combustion is when you have a true planet. The true planets are Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. When those planets are, it depends on if they're retrograde or not, but you can generally say about 9 or 10 degrees close to the sun. It means that the sun's light eclipses them and you can't see them in the sky anymore with your eyes, like if you look out in the middle of the night. When a planet is combust like that, what happens is that the outer kind of external manifestations of that planet, things that that planet symbolizes, are not seen. Okay, and Venus is a planet representing things like luxury, social grace, um, traveling, um, love, romance, and for him, again, he's the Pope, so a lot of these things, you know, that's true for him, right? I mean, he isn't married, so um, and that hasn't been part of his experience. So I'm just guessing probably K2 seems a little bit more like him generally rather than Venus. Okay. That's what I'm saying. So again, Venus has sort of 3 strikes against it, which is sort of funny that I'm using any kind of sports analogy because apparently he's into sports, especially baseball. But again, at least the debilitation is somewhat saved by the Mercury, strong Mercury that's with Venus. Okay, but and Venus is still helpful, but again, it's not nearly as strong as Mercury. So you know, yeah, I'm just thinking probably not Venus for him in terms of birth chart. Okay. The other thing is if he was born into Venus, like he would have been born into uh, that sort of so which I guess he might have been actually, because again, K2 is a short period of time. It's about what 7 years I think, and then after that comes Venus, and Venus is like 20 years. So and apparently even when he was very young, he decided he wanted to go down a spiritual path. So maybe. Anyway, the Lagna nakshatra we don't know because we don't have an exact birth time. The Sun nakshatra is an Uttara Phalguni. Uttara Phalguni is symbolized by uh, a hammock. And related to that is like enjoyment, relaxation, finer things of life, sometimes creativity. But all of this sort of enjoyment energy is also has a purpose to it. Okay, so he was very enjoyed a lot. He enjoys a lot what he does. The sun represents like career, soul, purpose. So, he's all about it. It's very strong there. The moon nakshatra, and again, the moon might have been gandanta, especially early in the day if he was born early in the day. The moon nakshatra for most of the day was in maga, and again, that's the throne energy up until 21:01 p.m. After that, it was in Purva Phalguni. Okay. Purva Phalguni is the nakshatra before Uttara Phalguni. Purva Phalguni is also symbolized by a hammock, or sometimes a marital bed, which seems sort of odd for a pope. But the thing is that when there are indications of spirituality, and one of the other symbols of Purva Phalguni is a Shivalinga, okay, which is about sort of, you know, making sacred unions. Okay, so with all this leadership energy, this is like a leader of spiritual unions because essentially, like he's given himself over to a life of God. Okay, and the thing is that there's also part of the reason why we know that there's spirituality. I'll talk about some of the yogas and stuff because he had a long list of yogas, which we'll go through. But um, the spirituality piece is that the Lord of the ninth house, which is considered to be the primary house of spirituality and religion, is Mars. And so Mars, the ruler of the ninth house, has gone to his moon chart or sun chart rising sign. So you are bringing ninth house energy of religion to him personally. So he's very much identified with the church. So that's where again, and then again he's can live the celibate life and that sort of thing. So again, I think in this case, it's very clear that that Purva Phalguni energy is more of a spiritual union type of energy. Okay, so his current dasha, his current planetary period is Jupiter. The sub period, not sure, depends on the time of day. If up until about 7:46 a.m., if he was born up until 7:46 a.m., then he would currently be in Jupiter Saturn. After 23:12 p.m., he would be in Jupiter Sun. So he might be anywhere, in between these planets, but at least we know he's in Jupiter, Hadasha, the main planetary period. And you can see Jupiter is another strong planet. It's exalted in the 12th house here. And the 12th house represents expenses, losses, also foreign places like traveling to Peru and Italy. When you have an exalted Jupiter like this in the 12th house, though, this can indicate charity. This can also indicate global overseas religion. So, yes, yes, yes for him, right? Okay, so, did I mention anything else? The other thing is, I alluded to it, but there's actually even more support. So you see a lot of strong, leadership energy with him. You have that Swa Sun with Mars. Again, Mars is the ruler of the ninth house of religion, so he's a spiritual leader. Moon is there as well. Moon's going to bring in this global, charitable, 12th house energy to him. Mars is not only going to bring ninth house spirituality, religion to him, but Mars is also the ruler of the fourth house of lineage, both family lineage, but also spiritual lineage. So you can see, that going on there. But the other thing, well, there's a couple more things, but Sun is super strong, Mercury super strong, Jupiter is super strong. Okay, Jupiter's exalted, Mercury exalted, and Sun swa. But you can see flanking this rising sign with the Moon, Mars, Sun up top. In the second house, you have Mercury and Venus. Those are two benefic planets. At least in his chart, Mercury is a benefic planet. So we have two benefic planets in the second house. You have Jupiter, a natural benefic planet, in the 12th house. You have three natural benefic planets flanking the Lugna, rising sign potentially, the Sun, and the Moon. Okay, this is huge. Okay, this is what we call a Kartari yoga. Okay, a yoga, if you're not familiar, is a planetary combination. That's when you get certain planets in certain positions and houses, and and then it kind of gives you these meta effects, above just the house-to-house analysis. So when you get a Kartari, well, Kartari, let me explain that first. Kartari means good scissors. Shub is good, Kartari is scissors. So it's a good scissors yoga. When you have these natural benefic planets on either side of a rising sign, you get the Kartari yoga. That means you cut through obstacles and delays. So he has this around all this strong leadership energy. Okay. The other thing, okay, so it's not just, so the Kartari happens when it's around the rising sign. Okay. So potentially in addition to that, he has the natural benefics on either side of the moon. That's called a Duradhara yoga. Okay. That gives, what does it give? I have it listed on the right side here. That gives enjoyment of all comforts of a ruler, wealth, vehicles, being generous, and having faithful servants. So he's got all of that too. Okay. In addition, these natural benefic planets on either side of the sun gives what we call Shubho yoga. Okay. Hopefully I'm saying that correctly. That's a solar yoga. Okay. That brings attractiveness, soft-spokenness, eloquence, renown, wealth, the lights of the world. Okay. So we haven't even looked really at the rest of the chart, but the sun in its own sign with Mars and Moon, okay, a lot of power, a lot of strength, a lot of fire. Mercury in its own sign, a lot of strength in the second house. Second house is related to family, it's also related to inner circle, it's also related to speech and assets. We have an exalted Jupiter in the 12th house, charity, life, teaching abroad, speaking abroad, and then all these benefics flanking potentially the Lugna, the rising sign, Moon, and Sun. This is an outstanding phenomenal combination for somebody who's in a major leadership position of a diaspora, global diaspora. I mean, just that alone is sort of breathtaking, frankly. Okay. So you may not need any more than that if you want to know about him. I am going to go through more of this sort of general Lugna, the rising sun, or moon, sun, rising sign potentially, and then the general chart on this slide. On the next slide, I'm going to go through other houses, and then after that, I'm going to look at his chart versus the current sky pattern, so that we understand why him as a pope now. Okay, so if you're up for that, stay tuned. But let me just go through my notes on the right side here. A lot of it I've talked about, but it should, I think, help consolidate. But we've got a ton of yogas, which is also again, if you've been watching my channel, I have videos on most of these yogas, and he has almost every yoga I've taught on the channel in his charts. That in and of itself is also an indication of a lot of power and strength, especially because the thing is you can have a yoga, you can have a planetary combination, but if the individual planets that make up that combination are not strong, it may not give that much. But you can see the sun is strong, Mercury super strong, Jupiter super strong. Venus, is not as strong, but it's got a strong, landlord here, Mercury. And we'll see, again, I'll go through it a little bit more, but we'll see that every planet here ends up landing in the nest of the Swa sun, super strong, or the Swa exalted Mercury. So even if they themselves are a little bit challenged, underpinnings for this whole chart is the Swa Sun and the Swa exalted Mercury, which is like kind of mind blowing. Okay, so let's get back to the top here. So again, this is either the sun or moon chart, both, and maybe even the Udaya Lagna, the constellation rising chart. But Surya or Chandra Lagna here. And again, that in and of itself indicates strength. So we've got a Leo, a constellation chart here, Simha in Sanskrit. This is a fixed fire sign. So this is a steady, continuous action. That's what we're getting here. They call that stira agni in Sanskrit. Okay, also, if you watch my Leo video, Leo rising people tend to naturally be leaders because, again, they're ruled by the sun. The sun is the sun, right? It's like things revolve around them. So that kind of dynamic tends to emerge from them naturally. The Lugnatia is the Swa sun I've been talking about. The other thing about the sun is that the sun is Bhavat Bhavam. Bhavat Bhavam is when you have, like in this particular case, the first lord, which is sun, going to the first house. That means that there's going to be continuous, uh, redirection and action of self. So as if there wasn't enough activity here, you have the two fire signs or two fire planets in a fixed fire sign. And then it's like Bhavat Bhavam on top. It's like this is somebody who's not going to quit and probably frankly a workaholic. Okay. And leading, probably one project after another. Um, so yeah, so again, even stronger leadership, continuous, so transforming and leading self. Also, the first house is a dharma stana, it's a house of duty. So the fact that this ruling planet, at least for the sun chart, moon chart, is in a dharma stana means that this person is primarily motivated by a sense of duty. Yeah. Let's see. And then again, we talked about Mars is in Purva Phalguni and Sun is in Uttara Phalguni. So there's enjoyment here with purpose. And this Mars, though, is combust. So, like Venus, so a lot of the Martian things you won't be able to see externally with him. There's going to be even more drive, even more fire internally, but outwardly. Um, Usually, when I see people with Venus combust, they're not the most emotionally expressive people because Venus is an emotional planet. The other things you can see, Moon is, new here, so Moon is becoming darker and darker until it passes Sun. So it's probably got like another day or two before Moon passes Sun. So Moon is getting darker. Moon is the other emotional planet. So this is somebody who probably comes across as much more rational and logical. And the feelings are a bit suppressed, I would say, in terms of expression. Not that they're not there, but they're more internal. And then with Mars being, combust, that means a lot of the outer manifestations of Mars are not going to be there. So Mars can be combative or rebellious or sometimes even violent planet potentially. And so, again, I think he will come. I don't know him. I've never heard him talk, but he would come across to from his chart as coming across to me as somebody who's really self-contained. Whereas when I looked at Pope Francis's chart, he was all about Mercury and Jupiter together, and Sun as well. So he was coming. Pope Leo's chart is coming across as like a true like administrator type. Also a bit, I would say, well, I think if I remember correctly, Mars was in the mix too for Pope Francis. Yeah, so there are a lot of fire, a lot of life focus for both of them. But Pope Francis's chart, he was coming through as much more of like a kind of a scholar, like a religious scholar. I'm not seeing that so much here with Pope Leo. Okay. Yeah, what else do we have? Um, so that kind of some of the fire, some of the competition stuff that Mars typically brings, especially with all this fire, you probably won't see it as much on the surface with him. It'll be there deep within, like his fire passion, like he knew from a young age that he wanted to go down this, and non-traditional path, So, and then we have the spiritual union, lineage, because Mars is the ruler of the fourth house of lineage, spiritual lineage, and the lord of the ninth house of religious and institutions. Two leadership planets here. A new moon, so there's a new cycle here. Fiery, transformative mind with all this fire, chief fire planets in the next fire sign. And again, a lot of fire. This much fire brings like somebody who's very organized. Um, and then global public high management. So this is bringing the 12th house stuff energy into the first house here. And again, with this strong of you know, a lugna here, usually it brings charm, resilience. But again, for him, with so much fire, I would think workaholic. And also medically, I was kind of a little bit like he might be a prime candidate for a stroke. I mean, God forbid, I don't want to wish that on anybody, but the sun represents general health, also cardiovascular system. And Mars can represent bleeding and sudden, you know, um, deviations, let's say. And Mars is eclipsed here, right? It's combust, so you can't see it. So this is like, and the first house represents the head. So this could be like a bleed you can't see in the head affecting, and the sun represents the central nervous system. So this could be like a full-on stroke. It might also be like what we call a TIA, transient ischemic attack, which are kind of like mini strokes. But with this kind of profile, medically, I would wonder if he's had them or if he might be prone to them. Yeah. So I mentioned a whole bunch of yogas. He's got a long list. So let's just go through. Some of them I've already talked about, but just to, just so you can like really appreciate his chart and the strength of his chart. I mean, it's just like, wow. I mean, all the charts I've looked at, I was like, this definitely stands out. Even among all the famous charts I've looked at. So, okay, so this 3 planets at the top here, that's a pravraja yoga. Okay. When you have 3 or 4 planets, depending on the house, when it's in a positive house, you need 3 or more. In a negative house, you need 4. But a pravraja yoga brings life focus. So he's focused on all this fire, the lineage, and then the religious institution here. And also because Sun is the strongest planet among these, the moon, Mars, and sun, the sun's going to be the most dominant. And again, the sun is a leadership. So he's going to be a leader of leaders. Okay. Then we have the Shubh-Kartra yoga, again, the good scissors yoga. That's the Mercury, Venus, Jupiter on either side. The great natural benefics on either side, not either side, on both sides of the rising sign. That's the good scissors yoga. That's going to cut through any obstacles that need to be overcome. Then there's Shobhavayachari yoga. That's a solar yoga when you have natural benefics on both sides of the sun. That's going to bring, again, a lot of um, uh, high speech, wealth, renown. Venus, because it's debilitated, but with its dispositor, that's what we call nicca bhanga yoga. That's what's going to help bring up Venus a bit, so it's not, you're not going to see the full extent of debilitation because of that. The Duradhara yoga, that's the natural benefics on either side of the moon. And again, bringing lots of, again, more wealth, generosity, servants, comforts, lots of good stuff. With the moon and Mars together here, that creates a chandra-mangala yoga, so more wealth, more property. Even if it's him, even if it's not his personally, he's in charge of all the wealth of the Vatican, which is a lot. If you've ever been, I mean, I was like, it kind of blew me away when I went to the Vatican. I had no idea what was involved. And I was like, wow, look at all this marble and gold and precious paintings. I was like, wow, it's like a treasure, you know, I mean, just huge, I don't know, just rooms and rooms of all this precious art and, material wealth. I was just stunned, really. I do believe we possibly have a Lakshmi yoga here. Lakshmi yoga is a yoga for great wealth. The reason why is that potentially, it's close. So to get a Lakshmi yoga, the ninth lord needs to be strong. Mars here on its own is not particularly strong, but it's got this swa sun that it's nested in. So, and Mars is combust, so that's a little iffy, but then you also need either the lugna being strong, which it is. So, I think there's, possibilities here of a Lakshmi yoga. It's not a full Lakshmi yoga, but again, this a Lakshmi yoga for this chart. So would Venus, or you could look at Venus. Venus is debilitating combust. I don't think Venus is going to create a Lakshmi yoga, but I think Mars being in this nested sun, I think that would give something. Maybe not a full Lakshmi yoga, but there's indications of wealth. Another potential indication of wealth here. Then you've got some spiritual yogas here. So I believe you have possibly a srikantha yoga. The srikantha yoga you get by having a strong lugna, which you do because you have sun in its own sign. Then a strong sun, which you do because sun is its own sign. And then a strong moon, which moon is, again, becoming new on its own, that would be considered a weakness. But that also is nested in the sun. So it may not be a full Srikant yoga, but there's a lot of strength here in that direction. The other spiritual yoga is Viranchi yoga. So for Viranchi yoga, you need a strong fifth house lord, which in this chart, the fifth house lord is Jupiter, and Jupiter's exalted, so it's strong. It's in a negative house though, so that is a little bit of a mark against it. But then you also need strong. So you need a strong fifth house lord, which is Jupiter, and then you need strong Jupiter, so it's the same. And then you need a strong Saturn, and Saturn's exalted. So you do have a Viranchi yoga. The only thing though is that Saturn and Jupiter are in negative houses, which is a bit of a drawback. But I think the Viranchi yoga is pretty strong. The Srikant yoga might be a little iffy. The Lakshmi yoga might be a little iffy, but you can see just the fact that he's pretty close to 2 here. Most people don't even have 1, and he's maybe got 2. So a lot of spiritual power here as well. Then he's got he's got kahala sarpa yoga, so that's all the planets on one side of the Rahu K2X with the other. That brings ambition and power. So more of that. He's also got what we call a kuja dosha, also known as a mangalic yoga. That's because Mars in the first house here. That can bring trouble with marriage and spouse. So, he was not married. So there you go. So again, that could be a problem because again, he's so focused, super focused and driven in this direction that it's like, I don't know if it's even crossed his mind. He's just like, no, I'm good without it or something. I don't know. Um, this is my path. I want to focus on this. So what else? He's also got a DK. That's a Dharma Karma Adipati Yogi. So that is well, let's see. See, Sun, Jupiter, Mars. Yeah, he has because he has Mars and Sun together, he has Dharma Karma Adipati Yoga. That's more power. He has more wealth. He's got Dana Yoga because Mercury is Swan exalted, and Mercury is the lord of the second house of assets. It's also the lord of the 11th house of income. So, a lot of wealth. Again, it may not be as personally, but a lot that he's going to manage. And then the other thing is you have a whole lot of kahala and parvata yogas here. So where do those come in? Well, those are based on the dispositor of a planet and or the dispositor of the dispositor. So what does that mean? Well, for example, at the top you've got Sun in its own sign. That's going to be strong. Mars has a strong dispositor. Mars on its own in Leo is not that strong, but the dispositor of Mars is Sun, and Sun is Swa, and then it happens that Mars is with its Swa in the dispositor. It's gonna make the foundation for Mars strong. So even though Mars on its own is in slightly strong condition because Sun is a friend sign to Mars, this swa sun that it's with is really going to boost it up and protect it from losses here. Okay, and the moon's is the same. So moon and Mars are both protected to some degree by this really strong dispositor that they have. Then Venus is protected by its dispositor because it's with the swa exalted to some degree by the swa exalted Mercury. Then if you look at Saturn, Saturn is in a sign of Venus. It's in Libra or Tula. And Venus, so if you go back to Venus, Venus on its own is challenged, but below Venus, underneath Venus is a swa Mercury. So by way of Venus and to the underlying Mercury, actually Saturn also gains strength. Then if you look at Rahu, Rahu is in a sign of Mars. So again, Mars is not super strong, but underlying Mars is a swa sun. So that really also supports Rahu. Then if you look at Ketu, Ketu is like Saturn's. Ketu's in the other sign ruled by Venus. It's in Taurus. So on its own, if Venus wasn't if Mercury wasn't with Venus in Virgo, then, this would actually bring the 10th house down. But the swa Mercury is supporting Venus, and this Venus, and through that is supporting Ketu. And then with Jupiter, Jupiter's in a sign of Moon. So Moon is not super strong, but underlying Moon is a swa sun. Do you see how this all... So basically, all these planets end up, back in, which is what I said in the beginning, back in either the related to or supported by this swa sun or the swa Mercury, which is like phenomenal. So yeah, okay. So, and then again, almost all these planets are strong. We have a swa sun, Mars and Moon, again, are in there, and they're friendly with Sun. Venus may not be that strong, but actually Mercury is a friendly sign for Venus, so that's supportive. Saturn is in a sign of Venus, which is supportive of Saturn. Rahu is exalted in Scorpio here. Ketu, again, is a sign of Venus, which is not super strong, but it's with Mercury, makes it stronger. And then Jupiter is in a friend sign of Cancer, because Cancer is ruled by Moon. So not only do you have all these yogas, okay, but these yogas are made up of planets that are super strong. So each time he runs these planets, which he's always running positive planets because they're all positive and supported in different layers, is that they're going to give him a lot in life at every turn, at almost any phase of his life, any dasha period, planetary period of his life. There's a lot of good that's going to come out of it. And again, not only is everything in yogas and everything yogic, the planets are all strong, but this is happening not only from the sun position, but the moon position, and possibly the udaya, the constellation rising position as well. Because if sometimes you can get a yoga and you only get it from the rising sign, or sometimes you get a yoga but you only get it from the moon sign. So already you're doubling up. So it's like that's what's like mind blowing about this chart is like all these yogas, all these planets strong, dispositors going back to the swa sun and swa exalted Mercury, and then at least doubling, if not tripling over. It's just like mind blowing. So yeah, so I hope you appreciate even to some degree what I'm appreciating. Because again, you don't see this very often. So let's look at the other houses now, just to get maybe a little bit more info about him. So on this slide, everything on the left is the same. On the right are my notes for the other houses. So the second house, we've been talking about a bit. The second house, Lord of the Swa exalted Mercury. It's in Chitra nakshatra. Chitra is related. The symbol of that is a cut gemstone. So wealth, but also organization and structure, architecture. Like the cut facets, of a diamond or gemstone or whatever. So that's going to bring even more organization to Mercury in Virgo, which is already like a dual earth sign. They're all about organizing things. Mercury's a very detail-oriented planet. This is all about getting things shipshape. Besides all this 2 fire planets and a fixed fire sign at the top. Very organized, efficient, like super, high charge, high level management person. Even if it didn't have to do with religion, that's just his nature and personality. He just seems to, he's just applying it to, religious institution here. And then we've got the combust sandhi Venus, again, challenge in Uttara Phalguni. That's going to be enjoyment, but with purpose. And again, that's combust. So he's not, externally, he's not going to be seeking pleasure. He's seeking internal pleasure, in terms of following this spiritual path. Yeah. And then you also have aspecting here a sandhi, somewhat unstable Ketu and Mrigashirsha. So that's a spiritual seeking, thing. And again, this spiritual seeking energy, the second house is also related to like childhood. And so he, from an early age, especially if he was, running, if he was either, it doesn't really, either way, he was either born into Ketu or Venus. Either way, Ketu and Venus are both related to the second house. So his second house of like early childhood development and learning, like even before you get to primary school, like that's why he knew so early on in his life that he wanted to go down this path. Then so all this together, ordered, logical, all second house of speech habits. He probably grew up in a very organized household, organized family, and I found out his mother was a librarian and his father was a veteran and then became a school superintendent. So so both his parents are very organized, and then also he was involved in like debates and stuff like that in school. So, because with Mercury's a planet of communication in the second house of oral communication, super strong. Venus, K2 is going to bring unusual energy here. So he actually knows like something like 5 or 6 languages. So this massive second house for him is going to be him just a master communicator in various languages. And again, being in Virgo's a dual sign. That's where the debate comes in, because it's like that's, debate person can, talk both sides of an issue potentially. Excuse me. So yeah, and then the third house here, third house lord is Venus. So you got an exalted Saturn and Vishaka. So Vishaka nakshatra is related to victory, but victory, at all costs. So third house is related to neighbors, also siblings. Saturn is a planet representing antiquity and conservative, so he probably he's got a couple brothers. I don't know much about him. His Wikipedia page didn't offer too much about his personal life, so I don't know. But because Saturn is exalted here, I would assume he has at least one sibling. And then Mercury rules the 11th house, and Mercury's so strong, the 11th house can represent older siblings. So he has, I believe, 2 older brothers. Um, so yeah, so this could be like, this is like victory over neighbors or victorious neighbors, conservative siblings. The other thing is that, I say, the Saturn is the ruler of the 7th house of independent business. And so, and it's also the ruler of the 6th house of enemies and rivalries and rivals. So this could be like his quote unquote independent business or line of work is converting spiritual rivals, like him being a missionary essentially in other countries, that sort of thing. Yeah. So, just the physical presence. Like sometimes it's not about like, trying to convince somebody through your words, but convincing people through actions, like physical actions, because Saturn's a very like physical planet. So, yeah. Then the fourth house lord is Mars. It aspects its own sign. That's going to make this house stronger, even if it's not strong enough. Jupiter's aspecting here as well. And then Rahu, we have a Gandanta Rahu. So Rahu's, quite unstable, but getting stronger because it's getting out of Gandanta position. But when Rahu's in Jesta, Jesta is the symbol of that is a talisman. So there can be like a lot of protective energy, not just physical protection. Sometimes you get people in like law enforcement and military, but you can also get like spiritual protection, like shamans and priests, which is essentially what he was. And then Jesta can also represent like elders, of like a community or of a family. So when you have Mars and Jupiter together, you can get law. So this is like protecting the lineage of spiritual law, of the lineage of elders, spiritual elders. And so, yeah, so also like fairly ambitious, there's some ambition here. Mars is a planet representing land, the fourth house represents property. So there's going to be property here as well, as if there weren't enough wealth yoga indicating that already. The fourth house also represents higher education. So with all this together, I would assume he's studied pretty rigorously religious law and scripture, and he does have a master's of divinity and a doctor of canon law. And then the other thing is, through his various, while he was in school and stuff like that, he was teaching math and science, which again, that doesn't surprise me because I mentioned like Venus is combust and Moon is almost combust, and those are the two emotional planets. So I would imagine if I met this person, he wouldn't come across to me as so much emotional. He would probably come across as very energetic because Mars and Sun, the two fire planets in a fire sign. But being energetic and being emotional are two different things, and sometimes they're hard to tell apart. So he might be quite animated, but I think his true emotions, again, they're both those planets. Venus is combust, Moon is almost combust. So I don't think his true emotions probably come to the surface. He's very again, organized, even his personality, I would say. Um, what else do we have here? So, yeah, so that seems to fit. Like again, I would assume a person like this is more into teaching like business or math or science more than like art or, literature or something like that. Because again, Venus and Moon, those are, Moon is like the imagination and again, emotional planet. Venus is arts and music and dancing. And again, those things are combust. You won't see the outer manifestations. So internally, probably even actually a highly emotional person, he just wouldn't necessarily express those emotions outwardly. So then the fifth house here, fifth house lord is exalted Jupiter. Jupiter's in Ashlesha. Ashlesha is symbolized by a snake. There can be a lot of like the snake, sometimes it can hiss and bite and, sneak away or slither away or whatever. Um, but when we have a benefic planet like Jupiter, and Jupiter is like a, diplomacy and balance, generosity, charity, um, spirituality, this is like almost like a healing, like the snake that heals. So this is like, spiritual healing, essentially. Um, and that's gone to the 12th house of loss, expenditures, overseas places, remote foreign places, and then also charity. And then Saturn is aspecting here. So the thing is that this also is a strong indication that he doesn't have children because Saturn is a planet of obstacles, delays. It's super strong. It's aspecting the fifth house that represents children. And then the Lord of the fifth house has gone to the 12th house. So, yeah. Yeah, so loss of children. But this also brings like victory on a global platform because the fifth house also represents like a platform or a stage. This is also, Astralasia can also be like because it's a snake, it kind of has this kind of mesmerizing energy. So this can be somebody who's like bringing attention to spirituality and to church because the 12th house, like remote places could be like churches and that sort of thing. So it's somebody who's bringing attention to spirituality globally. The sixth house lord is Saturn. It's aspected by Ketu. The sixth house is related to routines, so daily routines, seeking spirituality. I'm sure he's got a very involved process daily. This is also like there can be like hidden enemies here for him and rivals, I would say here, because of K2. Then the seventh house lord is Saturn. It's also aspected by Moon, Sun, Mars, so a lot of energy here as well. But if you spin this chart to the seventh house, what happens is Saturn is the lord. Saturn and the seventh house is ruled by Aquarius, which is a fixed air sign. So this is like fixed ideology. And then Saturn goes to the ninth house from the seventh, where it's exalted. So that's a really strong indication of like, creating some institution, being successful in creating some institution at all costs. So he really put himself on the line, like especially some of his work abroad was very precarious because it was happening during a very politically and military charged time. It sounded quite dangerous from what the little I read. But you can see that his path is to, again, build these long-standing religious institutions. With a, again, conservative ideology, Aquarius here. Then the eighth house lord is Jupiter. It aspects its own house. Mars is aspecting Mercury, Venus, Rahu. All those planets are aspecting here. So again, deeply emotional. The eighth house is deep psychology. Also diplomacy. Enjoyment is here. And then the purpose to protect and serve. A lot of goodwill here, though, because you have Jupiter's aspecting its own sign, so that's going to be strong in the eighth house, and then Venus is exalted in Pisces, so you have the two natural benefics super strong here in deep psychology. A lot of goodwill here, and then we've got the protective energy from Rahu, and then the innovative, leadership energy from Mars, and then the very strong organizational piece from Mercury here. So really strong deep psychology here. Then the ninth house. So the ninth house confused me a little bit, frankly. Let me just say that before I talk about it. So the ninth house lord is Mars. Okay, and we know Mars is on its own not strong, but it's nested in the strong Sun. Sorry. But Saturn is aspecting the ninth house here, where it's debilitated. So for somebody who's so like strong with religious institutions, this was surprising to me because I almost would have assumed would have thought at least Saturn wouldn't be debilitated, kind of knocking down the ninth house of spirituality, religion, and institutions here. The ninth house also represents father and authority, so I was like, well, maybe there were issues with his dad, or other authorities. And then when I was reading his Wikipedia page, apparently when he was in Peru, he did criticize the then president of the country for being involved with like terrorism or political corruption or so. It was like pretty, dire times. And so he was outspoken about that. So maybe that was when Saturn was maybe recreating its natal position, and debilitated in the ninth house. And then I'll talk about it more. But the other thing is that, again, Saturn is actually moving to Aries in February 2008. Um, so for him, I would imagine that might bring some troubles. Okay, so we'll see. But let me just keep going here, and then I'll talk about transits more on the next slide. So maybe him actually, criticizing, being victorious and criticizing, because he criticized, but he's still alive to talk about it. He survived criticizing, somebody who was involved with a lot of those shady dealings here. Then the 10th house I mentioned, the 10th house lord is Venus, which is combust, and then the Ketu's there. in Mrigashirsha. So his day job, if he has one, is the spiritual seeking. This you could also think of this as like renouncing 9 to 5 work. Any work that he does is all to support the spirituality. The 11th house lord is Mercury, and we know how strong that is. And the 11th house is related to income. So again, more money, and then it's also related to clubs, group, and society. So this is him speaking with and managing the public through all these different endeavors he's been involved with. Then the 12th house I've talked about. 12th house lord is Moon. We have an exalted Jupiter there, aspected by Rahu and Saturn. So ambition to protect and teach spirituality, religion, charity to the public abroad. So, especially all of his time in Peru through the years. And now he's in Italy. And he's running Jupiter. So he's, all about this global charity, bringing attention to global charity and goodwill. Okay, so on the next slide, we have the transits. Okay, so again, everything on the left is the same. On the right is a current sky pattern, or almost current sky pattern. And the reason why I have this up is, again, this helps us to understand, like why now, of all times, is he Pope? Clearly he has a lot of potential, like administrative, he's clearly going to be in charge of managing a lot of money, a lot of spirituality here, a lot of leadership skills, communication skills. So, but why now? So in terms of timing. So this particular sky pattern chart that I have on the right here, this was the last new moon, or Amavasya, that happened on 27th April 2025. So just about, 2 weeks ago? Yeah. This was the time of this chart, 1531 Eastern Daylight Time, or New York time. And I have a whole video where I went into depth on the analysis of this new moon. But the reason why I picked this moment is that it naturally is a Leo rising chart. Okay. So we can compare this Leo chart, for his moon or sun, and maybe his rising sign generally, with this Leo chart of the transits and sky pattern. Okay. And just to remind you, too, some of the key events that happened is that Pope Francis's predecessor passed away on April 21st. So, 6 days, almost a week before this particular chart date. And then Pope Francis was buried on April 26th, so the day before this. And then the conclave began. So when all the cardinals get together and they go through their voting election process for the next pope, began on May 7th, so after this chart. And then Pope Leo was elected on May 8th, so on the second day of the cardinal conclave. So this is basically after Pope Francis was buried, and now the conclave was probably starting to move in the direction of talking and thinking, choosing a new leader. So, what's similar and what's different about the current sky pattern? Let's talk about what's similar first, because there's a lot that's similar. And that's the reason why this was the time all this came together in terms of Pope Leo ascending into that position. So if you look at the 9th house here, you have Sun in Aries. Okay. Sun in Aries, Sun is exalted in Aries, so you have another strong Sun. And look, it's with a new moon, like in Pope Leo's chart. The other thing is that in this new moon chart, you have what we call a parivartana yoga, so an exchange of houses between Mars and Moon, because Moon is in a sign of Mars and Mars in a sign of Moon. So you can basically swap those. So what that means is you actually have Sun exalted with Mars Swa with a new moon all in the same house. So that gives you a very similar energy, not exactly the same, but that gives you a very similar energy, the Sun, Swa, Mars, and Moon combination he has in his natal chart. I mean, that alone is like, wow. Okay. And again, this in the transit chart, this is all happening in his 9th house of spirituality, religion, and institutions. Okay. This is also with, this is also the passing away of Pope Francis. You can see that in here. Okay. The other thing that's similar, that's also a great boon, okay, is that you have a Shubha Kartari yoga, again, that good scissors yoga, again, around this Moon, Sun, Mars combination, because you have Jupiter on one side, you have Venus on the other. And the other thing is that not only do you have a Shubha Kartari yoga, but you have a parivartana between Jupiter and Venus as well. That means not only do you have the Shubha Kartari yoga, but Venus here is exalted, Jupiter's in like ordinary condition on their own. But then when you do the parivartan exchange between Jupiter and Venus, that means that Venus comes back to its own sign where it's strong, and Jupiter comes back to its own sign in Pisces. So not only get a Shubha Kartari yoga, but these are highly strong, very strong yogic planets. They're going to give a lot. Just like in his chart. Okay. I mean, you literally have. I mean, so already, so that's also like mind blown again. Okay. Um, so you're essentially, they're in, different houses here, but you're essentially creating this whole Moon, Mars, Sun, really strong Sun with really strong natural benefics on both sides. I mean, that's incredible. Okay. A lot of strength, and again, cutting through obstacles. A lot of support to the moon, a lot of support to the sun. I mean, it's just like, wow. So in addition, as if there's not enough, you also have a kahala sarpa yoga again, because all the planets are on one side of Rahu Ketu axis, so that's going to bring ambition, drive. And look at this gaggle of planets in Pisces. So in his chart, they're all aspecting Pisces, but in his chart, you have Mars, Mercury, Venus, Rahu, Jupiter in Pisces through aspect. In the transit chart, you have Rahu, Venus, Mercury, Jupiter. You have Rahu, Venus, Mercury there, literally positioned in Pisces. You have Jupiter aspecting through Parivartana. And then instead of Mars, you got Saturn. I mean, this you've basically got. So there's a lot of like deep contemplation for him personally in his natal chart, because again, the eighth house is deep psychology. But there's deep, contemplation going on here behind closed doors, because eighth house is also hidden energy, is the formation of the cardinal conclave, like them talking and deciding and choosing, being very contemplative about, choosing their next leader. Okay, and in addition, not just all this stuff in Pisces, but then you also you have K2 in Virgo in the transit chart, where K2's aspecting Virgo in Pope Leo's chart. And then you have Venus and Mercury aspecting Virgo, and in his chart, they're in Virgo. So basically, you get, what is it? Venus, Mercury, and K2 in the second house in Virgo, with an addition of, what else? What do you get here? You get Saturn as well. But yeah, it's almost like too much to handle. Like, but because essentially there's so many similarities between his natal chart and the current sky pattern, or again, the recent sky pattern, because we're literally in the next few hours, Sun and Jupiter are switching out of here. And when when Sun moves out of Aries, it's going to lose power. When Jupiter moves out of here, you're going to lose the Shubha Kartari, good scissor yoga. You're going to use the Parivar. You're going to lose all this protection and support for the moon and the sun and Mars. Okay, literally in the next few hours. But for this moment in time, it was like a golden moment, and especially for him, because his chart, and this were so similar. It's like, yeah. So what's different though? What's different? Let's look at that. So in the transit chart, there is a sadhisati yoga, or not a yoga, but a sadhisati. So sadhisati is when Saturn is in the constellation before, of, or after the moon. And you can see Saturn is in the 12th house from the moon in this transit chart. So when somebody has a sadhisati, that indicates that some major support system, long-term support system, is being lost. So it could be just that Pope Francis passed, but the thing is that this is just the start of sadhisati here. This may mean because he was elected pope while this sati, was happening. Well, was, when was he elected? About a week later or so. May 8th. I should probably look at that. But this would, we'd have to look at the exact time more so of when he was elected, but um, this is already signaling to me that there might be problems with leadership and or the institution. Okay, so that's one signal here, potentially, is a sati. Okay, sati, lasts about 7.5 years. A lot of people are afraid of sati because Saturn takes 2.5 years to go through each sign. And when it goes through the sign before, of, and after the natal moon, that gives you 7.5 years of Saturnness. So obstacles, delays, anxiety, doubt, fear, chronic health problems, potentially death as well. Um, so that's going on. There's a sati here. The other thing is Sun in this transit chart is what we call karko bhavanasha. So Sun represents like father, and the ninth house also represents father. So when you have the planet representing the person of the same house, so the planet representing that person in the same house as the house that represents a person, which is like again father here, that can indicate problems with a person. So this could mean father, meaning again potentially Pope Francis, but it could also mean administrative, any administration that starts up next. So that's a second indication that there might be problems coming up in the not too distant future. And then the third thing is that Saturn is in the 12th house from Aries right now, but in February 2028, Saturn is going to start transiting Aries where it's debilitated. And so Saturn, as I mentioned before in my videos, is Saturn's like this like slow steamroller that just like caves over and restructures everything. And that's, again, not too far away, less than 3 years, maybe about 3 years. So even though this is like a golden moment to ascend to that high position, I'm just wondering here if there's troubles. I mean, again, the good thing is the sun is strong. Mars is also strong in the transit chart, and then you do have the Shubh-Kartri yoga and Parivartana yoga. So hopefully the Shubh-Kartri and Papa-Kartri and the strength of Mars and Sun will be enough to overcome whatever may happen. But it does look like problems are coming, fairly significant problems are coming, challenges are coming, fairly early on in the next few years. For him. But again, there might be enough strength in the transit chart and probably in his natal chart as well that, if anybody can overcome them, he seems like he's the right candidate to deal with whatever might be coming. All right, so there you go, Pope Leo XIV. Okay, so there you go, Pope Leo XIV. So thanks so much, as always, for stopping by, listening to one of my talks. I really appreciate your support on the channel. And all the different ways you guys do that. So liking, subscribing, posting lovely comments, sending in donations, sharing videos, all of it's very much appreciated. So thank you for all of that. Again, all of my teaching videos on the subject of Vedic Astrology are in my concepts playlist. They can be found there. I do offer individual birth chart readings. If that's of interest, you can email heartlightastro@yahoo.com for more info on that. And I do have another YouTube channel on natural medicine where I talk about other, uh, you know, um, natural medicine paradigms like Ayurveda, traditional Indian medicine, yoga, homeopathy, naturopathic medicine. So that's out there too for you. The name of that channel is Nature Source Care. All right. So as always, I hope you found this talk helpful, useful, and interesting to you as you learn to navigate the energy cycles of your own life. All right. So until the next one, take good care. Namaste.